The Simpsons. It's a show that really needs no introduction. 33 seasons deep and showing no signs of being cancelled anytime soon, the once behemoth of primetime television is truly a shadow of its former self. As the saying goes, nothing good lasts forever, but I think that's especially true with television. Shows usually have one of two options: they can retire at their peak and be adored for generations, or they can drag on to the point that nearly all life is sucked out. Sadly, I feel like The Simpsons firmly falls into the latter category. With billions of people around the world wondering what happens when they die, is The Simpsons proof that there really is life after death? It's no secret that the reputation of The Simpsons isn't in public favour, with the common perception being that the show lost its mojo somewhere between seasons 8 and 14. And although this video will be critical of the show's plots, writing and general production, it's in no way meant to be me having a pop at specific people.
Joke's on them.
There are some theories and names floating around the ether regarding the downfall of the show, but I think it's important to note that even though the numbers have dropped off significantly, and they have, it still averages over 2 million viewers per episode. Whether or not they're legacy viewers, though, is unknown. If I'm to sum up my attitude towards the situation in a couple of sentences, it would probably be that The Simpsons was always too good for its own longevity. Being able to condense decades of social issues and satire into 20-minute episodes was only ever going to be able to survive for so long, especially with the rise of more explicitly adult-orientated comedy. Shows like South Park and Family Guy brought less nuanced humour but delivered them in a familiar and relatable cartoon format. A gateway show for teenagers about to foray into the world of adult humour, if you like. To be able to see the cause of the downfall of The Simpsons, we're going to need to take a brief look at the beginnings of the show and the cornerstones of what made it a formidable powerhouse of primetime television. I'm going to gloss over most of the show's origin because, even though I think that it's quite interesting, I don't think that it really bears much importance in the context of this video. Before The Simpsons turned out as the instantly recognisable, googly-eyed yellow family the world knows them to be, they very nearly didn't exist at all. Then producer of The Tracy Ullman Show, James L. Brooks, you might recognise his name from the intro of The Simpsons, wanted to include some animated wraparounds for the commercial breaks in the show, and a comic strip by the name of Life in Hell impressed him. The comic's creator, Matt Groening, was asked to pitch for the show and initially planned to use the Life in Hell series to secure the deal. Realising it would end any publication rights that he had, he came up with the idea of a dysfunctional American family in the lobby of Brooks's office. At that very moment, the face of television was about to be changed forever. Being born in the mid-90s, which is a great film by Jonah Hill by the way, you really should check it out, I wasn't really around for much of Bartmania. As it's an American show, I imagine that most of its moves were made stateside, but if you ever went out shopping in the UK, you wouldn't have to look far to find something related to The Simpsons. Burger King and McDonald's ran toys with their meals, and a Bart Simpson balloon skated its way through the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade from 1990 to 1995. It would almost be selling them short to say that they became a global icon for Western media overnight. Then there was that infamous spat with the Bushes that inspired the episode Two Bad Neighbours, and American schools banning Simpsons merch and t-shirts. It's fair to say that The Simpsons has seen its fair share of controversial moments, but controversy isn't always a bad thing. Television and film have the ability to distract us from the world that we live in. Superheroes, anthropomorphic cars, talking ogres. To say that the majority of media is unrealistic would be an understatement. After all, their purpose is to entertain us, not to remind us of how fickle and unforgiving life can be. One thing that The Simpsons doesn't shy away from is showing us the reality of day-to-day life and the various flotsams of society. Homer is a blithering lazy boob, Marge is a lonely housewife, Bart the unachieving scamp, and Lisa the overachieving wise guy. They have their arguments, they have their fights, they struggle for money. The one thing they don't do is ignore the things that make us human. During my research for this video, I watched a lot of Simpsons episodes. If watching too much TV really does make your eyes go square, then I might be in trouble. I decided to sit and watch episodes from season 1 until season 14 for a couple of reasons. Namely, I don't have over 260 hours spare to chain every episode of The Simpsons ever made, and because it's generally perceived to be the period in which The Simpsons was at its best. The immediate thing that I noticed from a narrative perspective in the earlier seasons was how the plots were rooted in the struggles of everyday Western life. Take the series debut, Simpsons roasting on an open fire. Bart gets a tattoo on the sly and Marge has to use the family's Christmas savings to have it removed. Homer's Christmas bonus isn't happening, so the family don't have any money left for presents. In keeping the financial burden to himself, Homer takes up extra work as a mall Santa but finds out that it pays nowhere near enough for him to get what he needs. So in a last-ditch attempt to get some money together, Homer takes Bart to the Springfield Downs racetrack, starting him young. After ignoring Barney's tip in favour of a newcomer with 99-1 odds named Santa's Little Helper, to no one's surprise, Barney's favourite wins and Santa's Little Helper loses. After his owner abandons him, Homer lets Bart keep the dog and they return home to a worried Marge. Just as Homer is confessing about his Christmas bonus, Bart and Santa's Little Helper come bounding in, and the family welcome their latest addition. Christmas is saved, all is good again. If you forget that all of the family savings are gone because a grown adult gave a 10-year-old kid a tattoo, and that there's now another mouth to feed. Without getting too deep into the social commentary, it's the sad reality for a lot of families who are struggling to make ends meet. Christmas and birthdays can be an onerous time for a lot of families, caught between the desire to gift and treat loved ones and the frequently costly nature of doing so. As a kid, you might not know that your family doesn't have much money, but you don't see the parallels between the show and reality. I think that's a lot to do with the experiences we gain in our coming of age. As an adult, you can understand far more of the nuance in the writing, and that's something that's prevalent throughout the first season. Episode 3, Homer's Odyssey. Homer loses his job and, unable to find a new job, becomes depressed and attempts to commit suicide. Episode 6, Moaning Lisa. Lisa becomes depressed and finds solace in jazz music. Episode 9, Life in the Fast Lane. Homer forgets Marge's birthday and in panic buys her a bowling ball with his name on it. To spite Homer, she takes up bowling but is seduced by a French bowling instructor. Torn between Homer's negligence and Jacques' affection, Marge stands by her man. Even if they aren't things that all of us have experienced, they're sadly prevalent enough for us to understand the impacts that they have. If we contrast that with one of the episodes from season 33, the most recent at the time of writing, we can see how the general theme of the plots has shifted from the human condition and internal turmoil to nonsensical plots for the sake of making episodes. Take the description for episode 10, A Maid Maggie. Marge decides to baptise Maggie, so she sends Homer to find an appropriate godfather for her. After Fat Tony saves Homer and Maggie's lives, Homer and Marge reluctantly agree to let the Mafia Don be their baby's sponsor. But the more Fat Tony bonds with Maggie and draws her into his world, the more worried her real parents become. As much as I understand the humour behind the episode, it just doesn't feel right. It also doesn't really make much sense, considering in Season 7, Episode 3, Home Sweet Home Diddly Dum Doodly, Marge and Homer make an active effort to stop their children being baptised by Ned. I'm not saying as characters they can't change their mind, it just seems that 26 seasons later is a pretty odd time to suddenly decide to baptise a character. You might disagree with me, but I feel like at this point the writers are just coming up with scenarios to stick the characters in rather than figuring out plots that are consistent with the personalities and their experiences. Which is okay, if that's all the series ever was. I still think there is some merit to be had in producing a show for 33 seasons and still having new plots, but you have to know your characters, and somewhere along the line, I think that was lost. I still think that it's possible to find the show funny and be critical of it. One of my favourite episodes of the more recent series is Season 27, Episode 19, Fland Canyon. Admittedly, it doesn't come anywhere near close to my top 5, but there are some funny moments and I think the plot doesn't suck, which is a plus. Being able to incise modern society and arrange all of the components into an emotional and relatable piece of media isn't something that just any show can do. Well, theoretically, yeah, they could, but it has to make sense with the overall ethos of the show. If Family Guy suddenly started writing serious and deep plots dealing with the struggles of the working class, it wouldn't really make sense. Their shtick is more edgy and dark humour, and it works for them. I suppose the one thing that they both have in common is that they're being dragged out way longer than they should be. In essence, they've both become so successful that it doesn't make financial sense to stop. Realistically, you could argue that it's unfair to blame the shifting quality on anyone but the network, but as we just discussed, there's a huge financial side to it. The show still pulls in over 7 figures in viewers per episode, Simpsons merch is still popular, and having more episodes to show or sell as reruns is always good for a rainy day fund. The financial incentive behind keeping the show alive is a no-brainer from a business perspective, and unfortunately, that's just the reality of the industry. Most media nowadays is a numbers game, and controversy sells. Oftentimes, it doesn't even matter whether something gets negative or positive feedback as long as it brings in the views and the clicks. And hey, I'm not accusing the show of making subpar content for the sake of views, but I would imagine that it has some part to play in the renewals that continue to take place after the majority of the public fell out of love with the show. Other than the network milking the series dry, it's worth addressing some of the things that are commonly brought up whenever The Simpsons' decline is discussed, namely the writing and the defining moment that the season went to the dogs. I'll go through the writing first, and then I'll give my opinion on an episode that I think was the turning point for the series, but there's a lot of videos out there that already cover specific episodes on when The Simpsons started to go to pot, so you'll probably find that it's an unsurprising episode because I think most people agree that this episode is pretty bad, so just bear with me. Speaking as a writer, I know that you can never get everything perfect 100% of the time, and the more content that you make, the higher the chances are of something you do being received negatively. The Simpsons has had over 100 writers in its time, some who you know, others who you wouldn't, and some of which went on to write for Futurama and Disenchantment, two more Matt Groening creations. In my hunt for some numbers, I've listed some stats work done by PhD statistician Nathan Cunningham in his article, Why Did the Golden Age of The Simpsons End? It was really helpful considering that it's very hard to quantify everyone's opinion without having some numerical data to back it up. As we can see, the episode writer ratings in the episode chronology definitely follow a trend, that being lower ratings as the seasons progress. The data comes from IMDb, so obviously it isn't the view of every Simpsons viewer ever, but it's the closest that we're gonna get. It's easy to look at it and conclude that the newer writers' episodes are crap and the older writer episodes are goated, but I think that's just a unilateral analysis, and the truth is that there are other factors both internally and externally that are responsible for the quality of the episodes. After all, an artist is only as good as his tools, so a writer is only ever going to be as good as the things that he has to write about. After 717 episodes, even the most seasoned comedy writer might find themselves scraping the bottom of the proverbial barrel for inspiration. Perhaps it's why episodes like Lisa Goes Gaga exist. One of the things that made The Simpsons so impactful was its relatability, everyday mundane situations interweave with personal struggles that affect us all at some point in our lives. Obviously there's a fair few episodes in the Golden Age that aren't really like that, but they'd spend time building the characters up so we could relate to them regardless of the theme. And that's what I feel is missing nowadays. As I mentioned earlier, I feel like the show prioritizes plot lines over the actual contents of the episode, figuring out a situation and then dumping The Simpsons in it, writing in cheap, lazy laughs so the show isn't seen as Family Guy's unfunny cousin. It just doesn't feel right. You need to think about things each character would do and go for there, not think up a scenario and then think which character is most likely to do that, because then a lot of the time you'll end up reaching for connections and interactions and episodes just lose their strength. If you ask me to name one episode that I think kickstarted or sped up the decline of the show, well, I'll cut to the chase with this one because the less said about it the better, really. It's Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it. It's the perfect case study for why you should never build up trust with your audience and then throw it onto the bus for the sake of a plot twist. It took a beloved character in Seymour Skinner who we'd spent 9 seasons getting to know and pulled the rug out from under our feet. Being experimental and non-canon just doesn't save it, unfortunately. And we only found out truly that it was non-canon in like season 26 when there was a flashback of him as a baby, so yeah. For many fans it was a turning point, a benchmark of when The Simpsons began its downward spiral. There are still a good couple of strong episodes after that, and I think up until around the start of season 15.
It's a ring toss game.
That's it. I'm shutting this game down.
There are a couple of other things that I think are tertiary to these problems that still have some bearing, and that's the voice acting and the animation. And I don't want to single out the voice actors because it's not a problem with them specifically, it's more the fact that as the show gets older, you can tell that some of the voices are more of a strain on some of the actors, and in the later series there's definitely some noticeable changes in the voices where they don't really sound anything like they used to. Another one for me is the animation. If you're from the UK, you may have had The Simpsons on lockdown as part of your daily routine. For me, it was always on around the time that I would eat dinner. I even had a close friend who was once late to play a football game because he had to finish watching The Simpsons, which is as valid a reason as any. For a lot of kids though, it was an institution, especially if you couldn't afford or didn't have access to cable TV. Of course, they'd be reruns from the previous decade, but it didn't really matter. If you're really lucky, there would even sometimes be back-to-back episodes, which was definitely great during winter. So, given that context, perhaps it's possible that I have a bit of bias around the animation, so I won't talk about it too much. In Season 14, the show changed from traditional cell animation to digital ink and paint format. For me, there's something so special about the traditional style of animation. While many people would point at showrunners or writers as the biggest reason for the decline, I feel like the change in animation style definitely had a part to play. If you compare these two side-by-side clips from the earlier seasons and the most recent ones, Marge's movement looks stiff and awkward compared to how naturally it flowed before. Obviously, with the amount of demand on the animators and the storyboarders and all of those people, animating and colouring everything digitally is a no-brainer. I mean, check out some of these weird-looking people from the earlier seasons. You just wouldn't find people that look like this now. Which takes me back to one of my points at the start of the video, that The Simpsons was too good for its own longevity, and I don't think anything manifests that more than the animation. As you can imagine, making a 20-minute YouTube video takes a bit of time. Making a 20-minute episode of a series where you have to draw and hand paint every single frame, well, takes a little bit longer. I think the estimated time is around 6 months for one episode, which is insane. With more than 20 episodes per season, it was never going to be sustainable to continue producing in that format. In the earlier seasons, the team would be working 60 to 80-hour weeks just to finish 1 minute of footage. Doing the maths, estimating a 12-hour workday, it's about 148 days or nearly 5 months to finish one episode. Naturally, to meet the time demands, multiple episodes were in production at the same time. This level of work, this blood, sweat and tears mentality produced some of the best episodes of television the world has ever seen. Here's what I was saying before, it was too good, it was unsustainably good. The demand and pressure was too damn high to be able to take the same amount of time at the same cost. As the seasons progressed, hand-painted cells became digitally coloured, and by the time the Simpsons movie released, the team had just moved to fully 3D CGI. I'm not saying that season 18 onwards is crap because of it, and there are still funny moments, but at that exact moment the transition from hand-drawn to computer-drawn happened, I think The Simpsons died. Not literally, obviously, but spiritually. It's a real-life demonstration of the ship of Theseus paradox. That being, if a ship is replaced piece by piece over a journey, is the ship that arrives the same ship that left? Is The Simpsons the same show that glued families to their TV screens after replacing the animation process and the writers? The viewing figures would suggest that the answer is either no, or that whatever glue they're using just doesn't work anymore. It's sad to see the decline of The Simpsons. Luckily, the good old days stay locked inside the minds of those who were fortunate enough to watch it during its golden age. Sure, online services are there, but nothing beats the vibes of the pre-streaming days. When you couldn't just stop and rewind, television meant so much more. Perhaps it's time to lay The Simpsons to rest. Perhaps it's time to move on, because it just can't continue forever. Who knows how things will pan out in the coming years? I just know that the best days are gone, and the odds of catching lightning in a bottle twice are nil. But that's okay. It's okay because it did happen and we got to experience it, and no matter how much more the series declines, we can always go back and relive the best of it. And that is how The Simpsons has, does, and will continue to have life after death.